Good morning from the meeting of EU foreign ministers. It's just begun here in this building in Brussels. And of course, top of the agenda, as has been the case in all these meetings really for the past year, is the ongoing war in Ukraine and responses to it. And the core of the big debate here in Brussels this morning is around sending a Western-made main battle tank, so much heavier weapons, to Ukraine to respond to Kyiv's request. Kyiv says it needs these kind of heavier weapons to be able to ramp up its defensives, preparing potentially for a future offensive in the spring and an attempt to regain ground in Ukraine from the Ukrainian forces, but also, of course, responding to what they expect will be a new offensive from Russian forces. So while that's happening on the ground in Ukraine, or is expected to, here in Brussels, EU foreign ministers are trying to decide how to react. And at the crux of this debate is a couple of countries, including Poland and the Baltics, so Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, that would like to see sped up deliveries of much heavier arms to Ukraine. And on the other side of this debate really is Germany, which has been holding out on greenlighting the export of main battle tanks known as Leopard 2s to Ukraine. That's something Ukraine has been asking for, and it's now become really a source of discussion and debate among EU countries. And we've heard some frustration from those that see themselves as Ukraine's biggest supporters, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, this morning. And on the other hand, Germany trying to brush off this debate, saying that it wants to coordinate with international partners, particularly the US, but also that it doesn't want to see this war escalate into a direct conflict between, on the one hand, Russia and on the other hand, NATO countries, and instead that it will keep supporting Ukraine, but perhaps, we do not know yet, will it be in the forms Ukraine would like, which is with these Western-made main battle tanks, that heavier weaponry, which has so far been held out on by Berlin. We're not expecting any big breakthrough on that today, but certainly plenty of debate.
I mean, that's going to be a very big discussion, and I don't imagine that it's going to be an easy or short one. In the meantime, though, here in South Africa, as foreign ministers EU foreign ministers meet in Brussels, here in Pretoria in South Africa, the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, meets with the South African counterpart, international relations minister Naledi Pandor. Is the role that Africa plays coming up, do you think, in the discussions that take place in the EU today, when we do see the Russian foreign minister wanting to engage African nations?
Absolutely. I think that is a meeting in Pretoria which is being watched closely and with a degree of concern from here in Brussels. I was able to ask Sweden's foreign minister specifically about this, and he told me that it is a source of concern. There is a kind of worry here in Brussels, an accusation that Russia is essentially spreading propaganda on the African continent. We often hear discussions around narratives here in Brussels and who's winning the battle of the narratives, and that's because the EU has taken quite a strong and specific response to this invasion of Ukraine. It's imposed successive rounds of sanctions on Russia. It's basically severed ties with Moscow. And now what we see in that meeting with Naledi Pandor and her Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov is a different approach. And of course, South Africa has been calling for peace in this ongoing conflict, but it's taken a different route towards that from Brussels. And that's something which I think will be watched closely by ministers here today. And I think above all it shows a political division here between the European Union and South Africa. And I should say South Africa and the EU class themselves as strategic partners. South Africa is a hugely important partner for the European Union, a hugely important partner on the African continent, but also globally. And here this very different style of approach when it comes to relations with Russia, well, that shows political division, and certainly, as I said, is a source of concern, according to ministers that I've spoken to here in Brussels.
Yeah, I mean, this just as part of the agenda, I know a big focus on the Sahel region, on the African continent as well. And I wonder if on the agenda for the EU, as it sits today in Brussels, the angle really at looking into the Sahel region has to do with the role that Russia particularly is playing in that area.
That's a great point. And actually, when I spoke to Sweden's foreign minister and I asked him about his response to that meeting in Pretoria with Russian foreign minister Sergei Lavrov, he said, well, I'm happy that actually on the agenda today we have a very clear and detailed point on relations with the Sahel region and countries in coastal West Africa, because he sees this in a broader context, indeed, when it comes to the EU engagement with countries on the African continent, but also to what extent those relations are becoming more and more fraught. You'll remember that French troops withdrew withdrawing from Mali. There's a serious drawdown of troops there, and there's certainly lots of now political unrest that we've seen also in countries like Burkina Faso, and that is something the EU is trying to respond to. But I think it would be accused by critics of perhaps not doing enough or not responding in the right way. So ministers will be discussing that today. They have a whole other raft of topics on their agenda. They're likely to approve new sanctions on individuals and companies in Iran over what they see as a crackdown on protests there and abuses of human rights. And beyond that, they're also likely to be looking at this relationship with the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Prime Minister will also be here in Brussels. That's an important issue, we know, for South Africa, and they are likely to agree some sort of annual ministerial meeting, which might seem very technical, but that would actually be seen probably as quite a big political moment for relations between the European Union and the Palestinian Authority. So lots of big, broad foreign affairs topics happening here today. But as I said, on the top of ministers' agenda, as always has been for the past year, and we are now approaching the 1-year anniversary of that full-scale invasion of Ukraine, well, top of their agenda is, as always, relations with Kyiv and how to respond to the ongoing war which is happening on the European continent in Ukraine.
Yeah, it certainly has been a difficult year for the global community, watching tensions between Ukraine and Russia, explode, honestly. But I want to sit on the issue of the Palestinian Prime Minister joining the EU for talks in Brussels, and you've touched on it as well. A very big political moment, you've called it, for the EU. But do we know what the EU's position really is going to be in their talks with the Palestinian Prime Minister?
Absolutely. So the Palestinian Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister are coming for what they call an informal exchange of views. So basically that's to say that this is not a big formal sit-down talks, but for all intents and purposes it means that EU foreign ministers will meet with the Palestinian Prime Minister. And of course what will be high up on the agenda there is the response to the changed political reality in for the Palestinian Authority, and that is with regards to a new government in Israel which is seen as more nationalist, more right-wing, on which, of course, the EU will now have to rethink in terms of how it approaches the Middle East peace process, which, of course, has been seen as being at a standstill for a long time. And when it comes to the response, that's something the EU has a position on. So, for example, it is quite clear that it accuses Israel of violating international law through settlements. But, however, within these 27 countries, I should say there are different points of view. You have countries like Ireland, which push quite strongly for more condemnation of Israel, which push for more support of the Palestinian Authority. But on the other hand, you have a country like Hungary, which is seen as having quite close ties with Israel and would certainly probably be pushing for the European Union to deepen those ties with Tel Aviv further still. So it is absolutely a source of debate among European Union countries. And we should note that the situation on the ground in the Palestinian territories is seen by the European Union as worsening, and is seen very much as a source of concern. And I think for the Palestinian Prime Minister, when he joins these talks in Brussels, it will also be a moment to air grievances about the ongoing situation, but also a moment, certainly I think will be the hope from the Palestinian side, is to try and deepen political ties with the European Union, because I'm sure that would be seen from their audience at home as a moment of an important political moment, a time to deepen ties with the European Union at what is certainly seen from abroad and at home, I think, as a difficult moment for the Palestinian Authority in light of the new Israeli government.